The common claim that the brain creates consciousness is grounded in ontological realism, the assumption that there exists a mind-independent physical world in which brains are the fundamental causally sufficient generators of experience. This view treats the brain as an object whose properties exist fully and independently of observation, and assumes that consciousness must therefore emerge from its physical processes. Ontological realism, the view that a mind-independent reality exists exactly as it is, regardless of observation or conceptualization, assumes that the world can be known as it truly is. However, this assumption is difficult to sustain because all human knowledge is mediated through perception, language, and conceptual frameworks. We never access reality directly. Instead, we interpret sensory input through cognitive structures shaped by evolution, culture, and personal experience. What we call facts or objects are therefore always filtered through these frameworks, raising the question of whether reality as we conceive it truly mirrors any mind-independent world or merely reflects the structures of human cognition. A further challenge comes from the limits of language and categorization. Concepts like object, part, or whole are not intrinsic features of reality, but tools for organizing experience. Mereology, the study of parts and wholes, demonstrates that how we carve the world into entities depends on the presuppositions built into our conceptual system. A forest can be treated as one object or many. A molecule can be described in multiple ways depending on context. These choices reveal that what we treat as ontological reality is often a projection of conceptual convenience rather than an unmediated reflection of existence itself. Finally, developments in modern physics and philosophy underscore the provisional nature of supposed realist claims. Quantum mechanics, for instance, shows that at fundamental levels, particles do not have definite properties independent of observation, suggesting that observation and measurement are entangled with what we call reality. So this reasoning may be flawed because it conflates framework-dependent constructs with ultimate reality. Brains are described and understood within the conceptual system of biology, not as entities revealed in themselves apart from cognition. If consciousness is the very medium through which all experience and conceptualization arise, then reducing it to the activity of a brain risks creating a causal order as an assumption for how things work fundamentally. The brain is known only through consciousness, making the claim that it generates consciousness potentially incoherent. Similarly, philosophical idealism posits that consciousness is the primary ground in which the appearances of objects and facts emerge. Taken together, these considerations suggest that ontological realism may be flawed. Reality, as humans experience and describe it, may not exist as a fixed, independent entity, but rather as a structured manifestation within consciousness and conceptual frameworks. In modern physics, causality may not be a fundamental feature of reality, but rather an emergent or approximate principle arising within certain frameworks. In quantum mechanics, for example, events at the subatomic level are governed by probabilities rather than deterministic cause and effect chains, and phenomena like entanglement challenge the notion that influences propagate locally in a classical causal order. Similarly, in approaches to quantum gravity and cosmology, time itself, which underpins our intuitive understanding of causation, can emerge from more basic atemporal structures, suggesting that what we perceive as causal sequences is a macroscopic approximation. These insights imply that causality, rather than being an absolute property of the universe, may reflect patterns imposed by observation and conceptualization, highlighting the possibility that our everyday notion of cause and effect is contingent and not ontologically primary. If consciousness is the very medium through which all experience and conceptualization arise, then reducing it to the activity of a brain risks reversing the causal order. The brain is known only through consciousness, making the claim that it generates consciousness potentially incoherent. The common claim that the brain creates consciousness is grounded in ontological realism, the assumption that there exists a mind-independent physical world in which brains are the fundamental, causally sufficient entities that generate experience. This view treats the brain as an object whose properties exist fully and independently of assumes that consciousness must therefore emerge from its physical processes. However, this reasoning may be flawed because it conflates framework-dependent constructs with ultimate reality. Truth and facts. Truth is often defined simply as what the fact. Truth and facts. Truth is often defined simply as what the facts are. On this view, truth corresponds to reality as it exists independently of perception. Yet the concept of facts is not straightforward. They do not present themselves raw to human beings, but are always mediated by interpretation, categorization, and language. Thus, while truth might seem like a direct mirror of objective reality, in practice it functions through conceptual frameworks that shape how facts are recognized, described, and distinguished from non-facts. Truth, then, cannot be divorced from the act of conceiving, because facts are never experienced in isolation from thought. Truth as conceptual. This reliance on frameworks suggests that truth is not a brute feature of reality, but a conceptual achievement. Truth is therefore not merely out there, but emerges in the relation between reality and the conceptual schemes through which we engage it. Mereology and the limits of language. Mereology, the study of parts and wholes, highlights how our frameworks for truth are bound by linguistic and conceptual limits. Whether a forest is one thing or many trees depends on how we define unity and plurality, not on an ontological fact independent of description. Such examples show that truth is shaped by presupposed linguistic frameworks that cut reality into parts or unify them into wholes. This is not an error, but a reflection of how language operates. Truth, as we grasp it, is filtered through these structures, making it inseparable from the limits of conceptualization rather than a pure mirror of independent being. Implications for idealism. The inseparability of truth from conceptual mediation points toward idealism as the most coherent explanation. If facts are always accessed through the mind's frameworks, and if truth is always conceptual rather than raw reality, then the very notion of a mind-independent truth loses footing. Reality as we know it is constituted within consciousness, not apart from it. We can speak of brains existing as a biological fact because biology operates within a framework of empirical observation and functional description. Brains are observable organs studied through anatomy, physiology, and neuroscience, and their existence is confirmed through direct perception, dissection, and imaging technologies. In this sense, the brain is a coherent object of biological discourse. However, when we shift into theoretical particle physics, the language of brains no longer applies in the same way. Physics deals in quantum fields, particles, and interactions at fundamental levels that do not map neatly onto biological wholes. A brain is not a primitive unit in physics, but an emergent construct within a specific descriptive framework. Thus, what counts as a fact in biology is not the same kind of fact in physics. This distinction highlights a deeper problem in claiming that consciousness simply needs brains. If the existence of brains is itself dependent on a conceptual framework, biology's way of carving up experience, then reducing consciousness to brains assumes too much. It presumes that the biological description is ontologically primary, when in reality it is just one of many lenses through which we interpret phenomena. From the standpoint of physics, or even from the standpoint of phenomenology, the brain is not the ultimate reality, but a model within a discourse. Thus, the insistence that consciousness depends strictly on brains risks incoherence. It treats a framework relative construct as if it were an absolute ontological foundation, when consciousness itself may be the more fundamental condition through which such constructs even appear.